it's a story about standing up for points of fundamental principle, no matter what the personal consequences are, because sometimes things are worth fighting for, whatever the cost.
So, welcome everybody and good afternoon. Thank you in particular for braving the tube strikes. We're really happy to see such a full audience today. I'm Bea Brown. I'm head of the Rule of Law Unit at the Attorney General's Office, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all, ministers, culture enthusiasts, youth ambassadors, and aspiring filmmakers to this exciting event on justice storytelling. By way of background, the Rule of Law Unit was set up by the Attorney General in January 2025 with two key objectives. Firstly, to build a rule of law culture where everyone understands how our rule of law belief in fair play benefits our lives every day, from keeping communities safe to labour rights, and secondly, to develop the rule of law's future resilience, particularly at a time where it can feel that trust in institutions and the international rules-based order is at threat. So with that first objective in mind, we're really delighted to be partnering with the Garden Cinema to explore what rule of law culture means for film lovers. I should have printed on separate pages. It's a great pleasure to bring creative and legal minds together today for what I'm sure will be an illuminating discussion before a screening of Robert Mulligan's 1962 classic To Kill a Mockingbird. Before I begin, I want to thank the Garden Cinema's organising team, Molly, Richard, Joe, and so many others, as well as Isha and the Attorney General's Office Collective, who've designed this event today for our viewing pleasure. And so now to introduce our sparkling panel, who are going to share their expertise and insights for the next 45 minutes or so. At the far end, we have the Attorney General, Lord Hermer KC, currently serving as the Attorney General for England and Wales, as well as the Advocate General for Northern Ireland. He previously had a 30-year career in the legal profession, being called to the bar in 1993 and taking silk in 2009. Lord Hermer spent much of his career representing victims of state and corporate failure, including the families of those who died in the Grenfell fire. In 2022, he was appointed to the Task Force on Accountability for Crimes Committed in Ukraine following the Russian invasion. He is also the person responsible for choosing today's film. So Laura, in the middle, is the founder and managing director of the Merrittocracy, which is a true innovative social justice agency working across government, charities, and the cultural sector to drive change on some of the UK's most pressing justice issues, including criminal justice reform, violence against women and girls, and access to education. Alongside this, Laura is director of Bang Up Books, a nationally recognised initiative that has delivered 100,000 books into prisons across England and Wales, with a very recently published anthology. And her work really centres on how culture, narrative, and creative practice can shape public understanding of justice and influence real-world systems change. Finally, we've got Kevin Wong to my left as founder and director of the Manchester Crime and Justice Film Festival, an annual event that brings together filmmakers, legal professionals, academics, and communities to explore how film shapes public understanding of crime, punishment, and justice. Alongside that, Kevin is a reader in community justice and associate director for criminal justice at Manchester Metropolitan Uni, and also has a long-standing background as a writer for radio, film, theatre, including commissioned work for radio and a period as writer-in-residence at the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester. So I'm sure you'll agree it's going to be a fascinating range of voices. And so I'd like to open the discussion, Attorney, just to frame it. Why does the rule of law and justice matter in our everyday lives?
Look, we've only got 45 minutes, and I think people want to hear the headline points. Is something I talk about all the time. It's really hard to encapsulate precisely what the rule of law is, but it's incredibly important to be able to explain it. And to me, it's about living in a society where we have an ethos of fair play, where we have really clear rules that everybody applies to, no matter whether you are at the top of a tree or towards the bottom of a tree. It's the same rules, and it's applied equally to all of you. But it's a bit more than that for me. It's also about the kind of quality and the moral purpose of those laws, and that it's a framework that respects people's fundamental rights. And so I think that's always been important here. I think as you look around the world and you see what the real life consequences are for people when you don't have that framework in place, it's just a kind of stress why we need to grab onto it and we need to make it more resilient.
Why did you pick this film, Attorney? How does that relate? What did you see in this film that really was powerful to you when considering the issues you've just outlined?
Well, it was the book that first inspired me, and I read it when I was much younger. And I think before I decided to become a lawyer, I can't say it's what persuaded me, because I wanted to be like Atticus Finch, and particularly since we now have book 2 and we realise Atticus Finch is a more complicated figure than we probably realised with book 1. Just as well, I haven't said that, but because it's a story about standing up for points of fundamental principle, no matter what the personal consequences are, because sometimes things are worth fighting for, whatever the cost. And I think the story of that, understanding at the time it was written, is deeply powerful. And very shortly after we came into power, the Labour government, in July 24, we had riots, as everybody will remember, across the country. And a couple of weeks after those riots, I went up to Southport, where they started. I went to visit the library that had been burnt down, the community centre that had been burnt down, and they'd lost loads of books. And one of the things I wanted to do was to give some books to the library, and I had thought very carefully about what those books should be. And then this was kind of top of the list, and sitting down, actually talking to some of the kids who in the night time had been hiding in their homes, but the next morning came out to the local community centre to say, what can we do to sweep up? Talking to them about the books and the themes in that books, they got it.
That's really powerful, and actually a perfect segue, Laura, because I know we spoke about this book a lot, and many of us will have studied it in school or university at some point. What do you think, Laura, as a creative practitioner, a film can offer us, in particular when we're telling stories about justice?
Yeah, and absolutely. And obviously I run Bang Up Books as well, which we put books into prisons. So, I'm a big book advocate. I think books and films have similar but also different implications for how they can immerse people in different worlds, and they also reach different audiences as well. So I think films are incredibly important in the way that they kind of immerse, the way they portray characters, the way they portray nuance with somebody's kind of body language and the way that they look. And something that's very top of mind for me in the work that I do is that a lot of the people that I work with in prison can't read. So for them, a book is not accessible. And actually 60% of people in prison have a literacy age under the age of 11. So reading To Kill a Mockingbird would be currently out of their reach. So actually being able to, explore those characters' themes and to participate in the story and the cultural narrative through a film is incredibly empowering and also immersive.
I'm always really inspired by the projects that you have, Laura. Seems to be lots of concurrent policy and creative ideas working together. But I'm wondering, who have you seen as like a particularly inspiring creative advocate or filmmaker that you think's made a real impact?
Yeah, I think certainly I was reflecting on this. I think certainly in the kind of, the film space, we're almost awash with people. And certainly I think over the, recent years, perhaps more than ever, maybe I say more than ever, but we've seen kind of film and TV change cultural discourse and actually change the law in the way that we perhaps haven't previously seen. So something that comes top of mind for me is Adolescence, of course, by Stephen Graham and a brilliant team around him, which I've worked in violence against women and girls for a really long time, changed kind of cultural narratives and perceptions around, the impact of violent and misogynistic content online in a way that years of campaigning had not achieved. So film and TV has a massive power to shift the paradigms and the boundaries within which we live our lives. And another example is to kind of bring stories to the fore that are otherwise hidden. So a really good example, I think, is Baby Reindeer by Richard Gadd. And he, of course, brought to life, I'd really recommend watching it for those who haven't seen it, brought to life a story of a man who was being kind of stalked and harassed. And, I think that is again a story that so often goes kind of below the radar because it doesn't fit the mainstream cultural narrative, but is incredibly important in sort of changing our perceptions of what a victim and a perpetrator looks like.
Thanks, Laura. I think your point about it can activate change is really important. But I wonder, Kevin, as our expert on film culture, do you think that's happened recently? Has that always been the case, that justice be presented in such a way that inspires public shifts?
First of all, I can't claim to be an expert on how film impacts on society, but I am conscious of key films that have happened in the past that I think have at least raised the issue. And in a way, what film can do is contribute to the debate. So some examples of that kind of come to mind. There's a movie that came out in, I think, 1980s called The Accused, and it was about a rape victim, Jodie Foster, Kelly McGillis. And it was quite controversial at the time, partly because of the subject matter, but also because of the way in which the story ran, okay? And the controversy actually did bring to the fore, the way in which rape was dealt with, the attitudes towards women, okay? And it still stands, I think, as a film that kind of did something to kind of shift public opinion in the US. Other films I can think of, and again, this is about extending what we think about justice, I guess, right? Kathy Come Home, right? Ken Loach movie from the 1960s. Although I think Ken Loach's observation, whilst the film did have an impact, it led to the creation of Shelter, the housing charity, but clearly did not do anything to end homelessness. It's still with us, okay? But, having said that, it moved things on, it kind of created that debate. And it's kind of interesting because one of the films we're showing at the film festival this year is a film called Z or Z, okay, directed by French-Greek director Castorgravas. It was made in sort of 1969. It's a political thriller, and it was based on real-life events that took place in Greece. Okay, it's kind of interesting because we're trying to source the license for the film. I mean, if you ever run a film festival, okay, one of the major problems is actually getting a license to show the movie, and we couldn't find anyone that would normally use to try and get the license. So then I was googling around, and I came across an article about the fact that Z was actually shown at an event held to celebrate the 73rd anniversary of the European Convention of Human Rights at the Council of Europe. So we actually emailed them, my colleague did, because he speaks French, and he emailed them to find out about the license. Anyway, we managed to get the license from him. But it was kind of interesting that they chose that movie as a way of signifying the importance of human rights, okay, and about its fundamental importance to all our lives. So I think what film does do is that it brings to light and actually offers kind of cultural touchstones for issues and ideas that we want to try and ideally we want to try and cement in society as a whole.
Thank you to The Garden for getting licensing for today. But you're right, actually, sometimes that's the barrier to making these happen, so that's why we're happy to have it. Attorney, I saw that you were nodding along to Kathy Comes Home, and I was just wondering other films that you think have inspired you. I know we talk a lot about human rights in the Rule of Law unit, but is there a particular human rights advocate or issue that really stands out to you in cinema?
I mean, I was nodding to Kathy Comes Home just because it was a real reminder of actually how film, and increasingly that the merging line between film and TV, can produce social change. I mean, we saw that again, not a dissimilar vibe with Mr. Bates and the Post Office. And here's a campaign that had been running for so long. All the stuff had been already out in the public domain. but it was a dramatization that actually produced the moment of realizing there had been this absolutely gross miscarriage of justice. Even though all the evidence was out there before, it's making it real through drama that produced the result. I mean, for me, I mean, there are lots of films, I think. I mean, I kind of try and always think of things in historical. It's almost like doing kind of a desert island discs, but through film. I mean, I would just, for me, just kind of point out a few moments along my lifetime in which I think film has moved me politically to think about things in a different way. I was probably about 16 when I watched Killing Fields about the Khmer Rouge, and that, you know, I don't think it's an accident I've had a lifelong interest in international justice. You see the kind of manifestations of it. Then when I was at Manchester at university, I had a kind of a slight mini film festival. It was a bit more than that. It was an anti-racism week when I was at the student union there, and we started with Mississippi Burning to kind of drive the narrative. Now you can create a critique about Mississippi Burning that might be not a dissimilar one today, seen through current eyes, about the kind of white savior in terms of a much wider, more profound struggle. But it was still a very powerful movie. The other one I've just been thinking about today, because it's I'm really interested in the interrelationship between politics, art, and culture, not least as we thinking about how we work to embed rule of law ideas within culture. And what is it that art can do that politics can't? Right? Because it's a bit like film is one of those art forms where sometimes you can get to a deeper truth than you can through prose and words. In fact, fiction sometimes reveals it, and film sometimes reveals it. And that's what I was trying to think about, a moment in film that got. I was actually thinking of that moment in Schindler's List, which is in black and white. And then there's the moment of the young girl in the red dress, which is the only bit of colour, which was there was a truth to that. And there was something that conveyed about the horror through the use of color technology in a film that I just thought, I mean, profoundly moving, but also profoundly thought-provoking about how film conveys truth that sometimes mere fact can't.
I was thinking, just as you were talking about the aesthetics of filmmaking, about one of my favourite recent films on justice, Alice Diop's Saint Omer. She has similar, just this incredible yellow lighting that really focuses on certain faces. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a brilliant film, but really talks about the moral complexity, actually, of a courtroom drama without gavels and the cliches that you can often find in Hollywood depictions, however important they are. And it just, that subtlety is something that really enlivens the conversation. But Laura, I want to bring back, because you were mentioning prisoners and literacy, and you were making some really interesting points about how film can connect, and just telling us a bit about your story, about how you got into arts practice for social change. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so I kind of came at arts and creativity as a way to, engineer social change, and like with a real deep belief in the power of storytelling, exactly those ideas we've just been describing, to, just observing how do we meet people where they're at in a way that kind of, just saying to someone, you should really believe in this, it's morally the right thing to do. And someone's thinking, yeah, well, why should I care in my busy life? And I think, arts and creativity have a way of cutting through that is kind of nearly impossible for any other medium. And I'm always thinking about how do we bring change to people rather than asking people to come to change. And arts and culture have the power to do that. And that was why we set about, through Bang Up Books, producing our own anthology of prison writing, which was published just a couple of weeks ago on the 9th of April. And that's a collection of 55 pieces, the entire book. So everything from the artwork to the printing to the actual writing itself has been produced in the prison, inside prisons, which makes it a first of its kind. But for me, what was so powerful about that was giving the power of story and of the words and what they wanted to say and of art to those inside prison to communicate their experience. but we really focused on not, writing a prison book. So it wasn't, just about this is what it's like, life behind a cell. We used universal themes. So love, loss, hope, things that we can all connect with and resonate with. And I think the kind of best films, creative practice and art give everybody who's engaging with it a window in to that story, so that they can almost, put themselves inside the frame. And I think what, with that point about the dress, right? It's very much that. And I think to come back to today's film, which you're all, very, actually, I hope I'm not causing any spoilers. I hope everybody knows the story who's come today. So just wave alarmingly if you don't, because I'll stop now. But, when Atticus Finch, encourages people to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, that's what we tried to achieve with Once Upon a Time, our book, which was to give others a frame in through these kind of universal aspects of human experience. Like, you may have never been behind a prison door, but you may know what it's like to feel afraid.
Thank you. Kevin, I want to come to you because Laura's brought up some really interesting points there. You obviously approach this from both a writer's angle, an academic's angle, and a community justice practitioner. So I'm just really interested in how has that blended for you in your academic history, but also informing why you put the festival together?
Okay, so I guess that when myself and colleagues decided to pull the festival together, we're trying to unite two things. And one is a kind of keen interest in film, but also to try and, I guess, pick up some of the things from our own research and policy work that we do and try and insert them, or to try and give them an airing through the film festival. And interesting, just to pick up on Laura's saying, so one of the things we have done each year for the film festival is we've partnered with HMP Thorn Cross, which is an open prison in Warrington, which is between Liverpool and Manchester. And we've invited the learners there who are receiving education through Novus, which is an education provider. Anyway, they kind of, through their lessons, they choose a movie or choose a couple of movies. And what we try and do is, if we can, source a licensed film, and we actually include it as part of the film festival. And the first year we did it, we were able to actually, we had two learners from the prison come and actually talk about why they chose the movie as part of a kind of public screening, which is great. And they were allowed. They at that time, released on temporary license was easier to do. Okay, so they were allowed to go out just for the day. They came and talked about the film, shared the reason why they chose it. Okay. With the audience, and then they went back to the prison at the end of the session, and that was great. I mean, we've done the similar thing in the last couple of years, but unfortunately, because of the restrictions, we haven't been able to actually have any learners come and talk about it. No. So last year, what we tried to do is we did a recording. We did a sort of session where we kind of did a workshop about the film, actually at the prison, and we brought some of our students from the university to the prison. And they kind of did a workshop with them. And we recorded some of the learners' views on it. But then it was one of those things that we weren't even sure we were going to be able to actually play the recording, because it had to go through the prison authorities, then it had to go through the MOJ to sign off on it. And literally, I think it was probably days or the week before we actually got approval to actually show it. So I guess that's just an example, but I guess what we're trying to do there is to, first of all, through the festival, give an opportunity for people in the justice system who may be practitioners, or in this case, people actually in prison, to choose a film that may find a way of depicting their experience, and then we offer a forum to talk about it a bit like this, actually, and also have the wider public engage with that. So I guess in some ways it's about trying to pull all those things together.
We sometimes talk about unruly debate at the Attorney General's office, and the fact that people have differing views on justice. And I'm just really interested in when you were bringing those communities together. So you've mentioned student learners, people in prison. What was that like? Did you feel like you had to facilitate it quite closely, or did you enter into the spirit of unruly debate?
Well,
I hope it wasn't too unruly. I mean, if it had been, I think the prison would have shut it down. But in fact, to some extent, the learners have been told what was going to happen on that day. And if anyone knows anything about prisons knows that any prison regime, open or otherwise, is a very, very regimented regime. Okay, so they were told what's going to happen. Okay, we'd already briefed the students, so we took about, I don't know, a dozen students, okay, about what was going to happen during that day. But then actually during the workshop, we kind of had the students sitting with the learners together, and we gave them some questions to talk about. Myself and other colleagues sort of facilitated that, but pretty much we actually sat back as much as possible and let them engage. And the great thing was that there was a sort of degree of inevitably, there's a degree of apprehension on both sides, right? From the students actually being, because they actually did it in the prison, okay, even though it's an open prison. For the learners, you have to kind of remember that they get very little contact with, ordinary people from outside the prison. So for them, it was kind of quite unusual to kind of engage in that way. But during the course of the day, they kind of got used to it. They kind of warmed up to it. And they were having some really interesting conversations between them. And they strayed off the subject of the film, and that didn't really matter at all. They were talking about themselves, their lives, all that kind of stuff, right? And it was an opportunity for the learners to engage as people with the students, and the students to engage with them. And there was a kind of, it felt like a sort of an equal relationship in that regard. And the fact is that there was an outcome to it, which was that, I mean, you can't just go into a prison and do stuff. So that had to be, a kind of a learning outcome or a key aim. And that was, for the learners to talk about the film, and therefore would be able to show the film as part of the film festival. But, I think they got something out of it. The prison hopefully got something out of it, and which is why we've done it a couple of years now. And overall, I think it's kind of actually added to the film festival. And this year, what we're doing is both at the film festival and also as a related seminar, is that we're actually screening some films made by people in prison, not necessarily Thorn Cross, but other prisons, where an artist, I think Faye Claridge, worked with them on making a film about whatever it was they were doing. Okay, and so we're including that as part of the film festival and also as part of the seminar as well.
Thank you. I think, as you've raised, through literature, through film, it can often really empower people and actually level the discussion, because film can invite us to feel quite vulnerable when we're authoring something or playing with new ideas. So I can really understand how it makes impact, having worked in community development myself. But I want to turn, Attorney, we've spoken a lot about criminal justice, and actually you were a civil justice practitioner. Do you think civil justice is often left out of the conversation? Why is it that often the public want to watch crime narratives, do you think?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I suspect, having, as you say, worked predominantly in civil law, is because it's much more boring in the courtroom.
I doubt it. Your cases would suggest otherwise.
And it's certainly more slow moving. So, you kind of think about the great courtroom dramas. I'm going to watch one now, but I mean, you can think, in the name, was the Guildford 4 movie? There's been some brilliant movies around courtroom drama. I mean, the nature of a criminal courtroom is much more exciting. It's the theatre. There's a jury. The barristers totally ham it up. It's kind of almost made for film in some ways. Whereas, civil law, you don't have a jury. It's much more kind of forensic. Cases can take, lots of cases I did took years to get through. I mean, the underlying stuff is equally as compelling. I mean, my field was predominantly human rights and predominantly international human rights. So the kind of underlying case is biased. I thought was completely fascinating, and some of the stories about people I represented were completely compelling. So you don't get the courtroom, but you do get. I mean, take things about which there have been civil cases. I mean, take Steve McQueen's Grenfell. I mean, utterly devastatingly powerful. I mean, that wasn't about a civil case, but it's about something around which there was a civil case. It's about so much more than that. So you can, there are examples in which subject matters that become touched on by civil cases have been dealt with incredibly powerfully within film. But in terms of the courtroom experience, I don't think it was just my style, but I think generally speaking, it's a little more boring than the criminal court.
I'm going to invite you, attorney, into the director's seat. So if you were making a film, what do you think's missing out there? What stories would you want to tell?
I mean, the starting point is it's a dangerous world when you get politicians telling filmmakers what they should be making films about.
This could be your side hustle.
They give me my side hustle, and we're talking about all the ways, the incredibly positive ways that film can work for public good. But it's because it's such a powerful medium that we also know that it can be abused. I mean, Leni Riefenstahl created, visually stunning. Yeah, I mean, it's
stunning.
but powerful, and for you could not think of for the forces of evil.
Yeah.
So it's not that there is inherent moral value in celluloid. It's how we use it and how people choose to use it. Like I suspect we're going to look back at this particular time in history. And I very much hope we're going to look back at it, looking at different parts of the world, going, what went on? How do we let it get like this in all parts of the world? And I suspect when we come as a society to talk about that and remember it, it's going to be most powerfully done through art, not least film.
I think that's right. Art as change-making devices we've been discussing. Laura, how about you? What stories are missing? Who would you invite to share them?
Yeah, I mean, there really is so many, but I just wanted to pick up quickly on that point that you made, attorney, about film where film can cause.
It's just still weird. I find it weird people calling me attorney rather than Richard. So
Richard, Richard, yeah, let's do that. Let's I prefer Richard too.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So. But this morning, I've been on the Independent Pornography Review Task Force. So it's very topical because that's where I just came from to come here. And part of that conversation was talking about regulation of pornography and, in fact, the role of the BBFC, which, forgive me if I butcher this acronym, but it's the British Board of Film Classification. And actually, the reason we were having that conversation is because essentially, video content online of, violent and misogynistic pornographic content has circulated kind of without any guardrails. And this, the role of a task force is about putting those guardrails back on. So I think I've very much come from having that conversation all about that note of caution of, that, what we put out into the world is not all created equal, and in fact can have a huge impact on harm, on, shaping people's behaviour in the real world in ways that we absolutely do not want. So, very topical because it's front of mind for me today. But in terms of the, stories that I would really platform, I think for me that it's such a hard one. There's just so many. But I really, in that world around, I do a huge amount of my work in kind of violence against women and girls, as much as I work in prison as well. And I think showing those kind of multiple victim, multiple perpetrator narratives in those scenarios, and also in drawing to people's attention the work that's going on around that in the world, like so often is under-platformed, I think, in terms of, positive change and seeing solutions. And I think why criminal narratives often get such attention is because it fulfills the sort of human need for an ending of somebody won or somebody didn't, rather than that the kind of the fight goes on, and perhaps it's maybe going to take a really long time and that kind of incremental change. And I think about, for example, those regulators in pornography who I was having a conversation with this morning about how do we bring that conversation to people where they're at. And actually, I'd love to see some of those more nuanced narratives get the platform that they deserve, and people doing that kind of incremental change bit by bit.
It's an amazingly broad conversation, and we're soon wrapping up. But I just want to turn our attention to the film that we're about to see, Kevin. Is it dated? You know, this is a 1962 classic. We've heard from the attorney. It does touch on white saviorism, racialized dynamics, narratives that we should or shouldn't be seeing on screen. What might a To Kill a Mockingbird of today look like attending to some of those issues?
I think it's quite difficult actually to think about, because I was thinking about it earlier on today, mainly because the film we're seeing was made in 1962. Okay, all right. The film was set in the Great Depression, which is what, 1930s. Okay, so it's even further back in time, right? So the question is, are you truthful to the time, right, with all its inherent messiness, racism, bigotry, all that stuff, right? Or do you do something where you try and, I don't know, nuance it in some shape or form? And I don't know. I mean, I suppose if I were to kind of pivot one way or the other, I'd almost say leave it as it is. Okay, present it as it is, just because that's what it was. Okay, right. But also that those things have not gone away, right? That the reality is that the issues depicted there are still current, and they're issues that kind of recur, right? And one thing I think we've learned from the sort of I don't know, geopolitical situation we find ourselves in is that the cherished institutions and ideas about law and all that kind of stuff that we may take for granted are ones you can't take for granted. You have to be almost constantly arguing for them, advocating for them, and nurturing them. Otherwise, they can disappear really easily. So I guess if I were to do it again, I'd probably try and I wouldn't want to do it again because I think it kind of works pretty well as it is. Although I think it has been adapted as a theatre play in the past and like that, so it's taken other forms. But I'd kind of almost be reluctant to kind of do it as a film, you know. So
leave it where it is. And thank you for that reminder that it's all our responsibilities to defend these institutions, these beliefs in justice. I'm coming to you, attorney, for the final word. We've got film lovers here, filmmakers here. What would be your call to action?
Well, I'm going to repeat, it ain't for politicians to be telling
True,
the film community what they should be filming about. But I think there is a moment for all of us, right, no matter what we do in life, for being really clear about our values and to be out there explaining to everybody in whatever medium we work, whether it's our friends or whether it's on film or whether it's on social media, if we believe in these values, to be out there explaining to people why we believe in those values, why it's so important, and why I think at this particular moment in history, it's never been more important to be out there talking about them.
Thank you. And just to say, this is the first in, we hope, many events working with different cultural communities, theatre makers, spoken word, etc. So I think we are all invested in this idea that it's our collective responsibility to fight for values we believe in. So I'd like to say thank you to our tremendous panellists. If you want to join me in a round of applause. Thank you. It's been a really fantastic discussion, which I'm sure many of us would want to continue in the bar after the film. And I really hope that the panel has sparked some new ideas to unite fellow creative and legal leaders to join us in this protection of a rule of law culture. Just to say, if you're interested in our work, please do follow us at the Attorney General's office on our social medias. You've heard from the Merrittocracy, you know to come to the Manchester Crime and Justice Film Festival. And also we have some of our youth ambassadors here today who are also doing brilliant campaigns, bringing the rule of law to life through cultural mediums. So again, thank you very much to the Garden Cinema for hosting us, and you now have a 10-minute break before our film begins. Thank you.